morning! It's beautiful here. I'm going to turn the camera a little bit so you can see how pretty. Oh, that's pretty Catherine. Say good morning, Catherine. Bright sunshine today. Okay, so we are on chapters 3 and 4 today, and I'm going to start doing like 2 chapters every time I record. So, I'm trying to do some every day, but our weekends here are like crazy busy. So, I'll do like 2 chapters every day and then probably take the weekends off. Maybe I'll get 1 or 2 chapters in on a weekend, depending on how busy the weekend is. Anyway, we're coming up onto our festivals, and we have lots of weddings and all that kind of stuff at our church, so we're just busy. Anyway, so chapter 3, a buddy. And now I'm going into my southern accent. So here we go. After church, Mr. Nelson carries the dog off in his truck. But just before he drives away, I get a chance to whisper in that dog's ear not to worry, because I got a plan. Of course, I don't tell anybody else about my plan. I just lay in bed that night while Tanya's singing herself to sleep, and cross my fingers and try to figure out what to do next. In the morning, I head off to school as usual. I get tired of going to school, especially toward the end of the year. They got the Jazz Fest going on out at the racetrack. They got the flowers blooming all over the yards. They got all that breeze coming straight off the river and drifting all over the house when we open up the windows. You can hear the ships blowing their horns and the birds singing in the trees. To tell the truth, that just ain't the time to be sitting at a little bitty desk. That's the time to be outside. We're all sitting there after lunch trying to pay attention, and it ain't working. That boy Rusty 2 seats over is falling asleep. His eyes are half shut and his mouth is drooping open. Somebody, accidentally on purpose, drops a book. Everybody jumps and the girls scream. Finally, the teacher says, "Okay, enough of that," and starts to hand out paper to draw on. I feel like making an airplane and flying it straight out the window with me on it. But I don't do that. I wait. Then he says, "This is free drawing time. Draw something you love." And I think, if it's free, why do we have to draw something we love? Why can't we draw something we hate? But I don't say that. I pick up my pencil and I get ready to draw, but I've got some problems. The first problem is I ain't a good drawer. Jamila was a good drawer, but she's gone. If she were here, she would get me started on whatever it is I'm going to draw, which is the second problem. What am I going to draw? J-Boy is sitting next to me like always. He's too old for this class, but here he is anyway. "What are you going to draw?" I whisper. "I ain't drawn nothing," he says. "You're a lazy fool," I say. He shrugs up his shoulders. "I'm going to draw a dog," I say. "So you love dogs?" "I love my dog." "You ain't got a dog." "I'm going to get one." "How?" "I got a plan." "Who's the fool now?" he says, and puts his head down on his desk. That afternoon we go visit the dog at the vet's, but the vet won't let us see him. He says the dog is pretty bad off. He's getting him ready for surgery. He says that dog's leg is broke so bad he can't save it. He says he's got to cut it off. Tanya's sitting there with her eyes all big and round when he says, "Cut it off." Tears swell up like an overflowing gutter and come rolling all down her cheeks. Mama looks at her and says, "Don't take on now. It's for the best." When we get home, Grandpa T's sitting in the front room with the baby riding up and down on his knee and the TV going. Mama says, I told you he needed a nap. Grandpa T says, he ain't sleepy. Mama snatches up the baby and stomps off up the stairs. Grandpa T looks at Daddy and says, what's wrong with that woman? Daddy says, it's the dog. He's got to have his leg cut off. Grandpa T says, woo-wee, and shakes his head. How is a dog going to manage it with only 3 legs? I sit down and open my book bag. I pull out my picture. I'm looking at it and looking at it. I think I did a pretty good job, even if I did do it all by myself. It don't look alive, but anybody can see it's a dog. There's only one thing wrong with it. It's got 4 legs. We go back 2 days later, and that big old dog is laying in a wire cage with a big blue plastic cone around its neck. His half leg all wrapped up in bandages, and his ribs still looking like a piece of black corduroy cloth had laid over a frame. When we walk in, he lifts his head up and cocks it to one side like he's thinking to himself. I seen that boy before. What's that blue thing around his neck? I say. It's collar, the doctor says, to keep him from worrying his wound. Why would he want to do that? He's a dog. That's what dogs do. Why is he all pinned up? To keep him resting, the doctor says, just for a day or 2. Daddy's standing at the door watching us. What happens then? He asks. Then he needs a home, the doctor says. He ain't a little dog, Daddy says. He needs a home with a big yard. We don't have too many of those in the city, the doctor says. He'll have to make do with something else. We're all making do, Daddy says. He heaves a sigh, and I know he's thinking about the car that's making a funny noise, and that stack of letters I saw by the telephone, and the lady at school who says I need glasses if I'm going to do my best next year. I'm standing there beside the cage. That dog pokes his nose at the wires and starts whining. I reach through and rub his head real soft. He quiets right down and closes his eyes. Is he ever going to get well? I say. The doctor nods. He's weak because he's old and he hasn't been eating right, but once he stands up and starts getting around, he'll be okay. How's he going to manage with only 3 legs? He'll be fine. He just needs somebody to look after him while he heals, and to love him when he's well. And to feed him, Daddy says, and take him on walks and clean up his business. That's true, the doctor says. That's money, Daddy says. Come on, son, we gotta go. Then I take my hand off the dog. His eyes pop open and he lifts up his head. He's watching us the whole way down the hall, and when I raise my hand to wave goodbye, I swear I see his tail go thump again. That night, Grandpa T's sitting on the porch drinking a beer, and when I finish up my homework, I go out and I sit down beside him. That dog's getting better, I say. The vet says he's going to be able to get around on 3 legs just fine. Grandpa T don't say nothing. The street light flips on and starts buzzing. He's going to need a home soon. Somebody's got to look after him while he heals. Somebody's got to help him learn to walk again. Got to take care of him extra good because he's a special dog. Grandpa T takes another sip. I want a dog, I say. A real dog, not just a picture. Grandpa T sets down the can and looks out at the street. It's pretty dark out there. Ain't much for him to see. I want a dog, I say again. But Daddy says a dog costs too much to feed. What about a chicken? Grandpa T says. I had a chicken once. When the new ones hatched, my mama pointed and said, you want a pet? That's one's yours. I named it Henny Penny, and I raised it from a ball of yellow fluff. I talked to it. It clucked back. I used to scratch around the back. I didn't use. It used to scratch around the back steps. It came waddling out when I called. Grandpa T takes another sip and looks down at me. So what do you say to a chicken? I don't want a chicken. I want a dog. I want that dog. Grandpa T sets down the can and shakes his head. That ain't a little dog. He eats a lot. I'll sell my Game Boy. Grandpa P picks up the can and takes a long drink. I've already talked to J-Boy down the street, I say. Is he that big boy who used to come sniffing around when Jamila was staying here after school? Yeah, I guess so. You still play with him sometimes? We don't play, I say. We just pass the time. Grandpa T looks at me and then he nods. That's what I meant, he says. J-Boy says he'll buy it. He says he's got the money already. He says he'll buy all the games, too. You'd really do that? Grandpa T says. He's shaking the beer can. It's empty. You'd sell that Game Boy? I take a deep breath. I already did. I reach in my pocket and I pull out money. A lot of money. Today, I say, in school. We're sitting there looking at my hand all stuffed full of money. I want a dog, I say. I want that dog. Grandpa T stands up. Way up high in the trees, the frogs are screaming. Across the street, the lady's air conditioner comes roaring on. I plan on naming him Buddy, I say, because that's what he'll be, my buddy. I shove the money back in my pocket. I look up, and there's Grandpa T looking down at me in the dark evening. Behind him is the big old sky, all full of stars. I cross my fingers. I'll go talk to your daddy, Grandpa T says, and he's his own inside. That's the end of chapter 3. Getting good. Chapter 4. We bring Buddy home that Saturday morning. When we pull up the car, there's Mama standing on the front porch with her hands on her hips. She says, well, I never. And then she stops. A 3-legged dog, she says. Then she turns around and goes inside the house. Tanya's standing in the door with all her teeth showing in a grin and a ponytail sticking straight up on top of her head. What's that he got around his neck, she says. That keeps him from licking his cut. Why would he want to lick his cut? He's a dog, you fool. What do you expect? Daddy lifts Buddy out of the car and carries him around the house to the backyard, where we have a shed leaning up against the pecan tree. I fluff up the old army blanket Mama gave me, and Daddy lays Buddy down right on top. Buddy gives a little yip when he hits that blanket and pushes around with his front feet like he wants to get away, but he can't move. Your mama's going to need you in the house after a while, Daddy says. Buddy's poking his nose around in that blanket, smelling everybody who's ever touched it, and that's a lot of people. I sit myself down right beside him. It's okay, boy, I tell him. It's okay now. You hear me, son? I look up, and there's Daddy with his arms crossed over his chest and his eyebrows twisting down toward his nose. Yes, sir, I heard you. Daddy walks out, and before he even gets to the house, Buddy's finished smelling the blanket. His ears are standing up tall, and he's looking around like he's wondering what might jump out at him from behind all the stuff piled up in that shed. Ain't nothing in here, I'm saying. Just old junk. We ain't thrown away yet. Buddy looks at me like he's not so sure. Then he's checking out the shed again. His eyes are flicking back and forth from the lawnmower to the rake, to the torn-up window screen, to the stack of paint cans, to the rotten box of floor tiles. So do you like it here, I'm saying? Does it suit you? I'm leaning around trying to see his face in that collar when all of a sudden he turns around to check me out again. I straighten up and he tilts his head to one side. So what do you think, I say? Are you wondering what kind of boy it is that would bring you to a place like this? His mouth is hanging open and the tip of his tongue is rolling out on one side. He's going when he breathes. He's looking at my face and my feet. He's looking at my hands to see what I might be holding, but there ain't nothing there. Do you think I look like I can take care of you? He don't say nothing. I reach out and pet his head. He gets still. So what are we going to do with a 3-legged dog? I look up and... sorry, wrong person. So what are we going to do with a 3-legged dog? I look up and there's Grandpa T standing in the door with Tanya tippy-toeing around the corner right beside him. Buddy snaps his mouth shut and lays his head down. I rub his side and feel those ribs sticking up like the rails on the train track. Y'all ain't gonna do nothing with him, I say. He's mine. All of a sudden, Buddy starts whining and turning his neck every which way, trying to rub that collar off. That ain't good, Grandpa T says. Stop that, Buddy. I put my hand back on his side. Stop that now. Buddy takes his white paw and pushes at the collar a little, then flops his head back down. He rolls his big old eyes up at me, and I think it's just as well he can't talk. He don't act like a happy dog right now, Grandpa T says. He will be, I say. He's just getting used to being here. He's going to find out I take such good care of him, he can't help but be happy. Grandpa T's just standing there nodding. He looks at the bowls I found for Buddy. He looks at the great big bag of food stuck in the corner. I see you're going to give it your best shot, he says. Just give me a little time, I say. Can I pet him? Tanya pipes up. I look over at Tanya standing there wearing those plastic high-heeled shoes with the big old pink bows on the toe. He's mine, I say. Can't nobody pet him but me. Tanya's shoulders go all droopy and her thumb starts heading for her mouth. So I say, oh, all right, you can pet him some. She comes in and squats down beside him with her knees up to her shoulders and her hands on her knees. She sticks out her hand real easy. Buddy don't move. Will he bite me? Are you crazy? He's got big teeth. Those are dog teeth. She touches the top of his head with just her fingertips. He lifts up a little and she snatches back her hand. He sniffs her shoes. Then all of a sudden he sticks out his tongue and licks one of those bows. Tanya jumps up screaming and hollering. Lucky for her, Grandpa T grabs her before she falls over. Have you lost your mind, I say. Go on now, that's enough. He's tired. So they leave and I stretch out beside Buddy on the blanket. Don't worry about her, Buddy, I say. You ain't her dog, you're mine. And I ain't going to let her bother you. I promise. He puts his head on my mouth, on my stomach, collar and all, and it feels warm and heavy. It's just you and me now, Buddy, I say. I'm resting my hand on his side and laying there looking up at the tin roof. The sun's coming in through that dirty old window on the front of the shed, and I think someday I ought to clean it up so Buddy can get a better light when the door is shut. The birds are singing outside, and I can hear baby Terrell crying in the house. I gotta go inside a while, I say, but I'll stay as long as I can. He shifts his head a little, but he don't answer. If you want me to, I say, I can tell you a story. Somebody's driving down the street with his music blasting. When the music's past, I lift up my head. Buddy's big old eyes are watching me and waiting. It ain't hard to take care of Buddy. He lays there waiting for me in the morning when I come in to fill his bowl and pour his water. His chin is resting on his paws. His eyes are half closed and barely moving back and forth while he watches me fluff up his blanket and clean up his business. You okay? Are you doing okay this morning, I say? Do you like that collar any better? Is your leg hurting you? Are you tired of laying there yet? I rub him on his head, and I lean down and put my nose between his ears, and I smell that old leaf smell and the plastic collar, too. He lifts up his tongue and licks my chin, and the spot stays cool for a long time. On Monday, all day long at school, the teacher's going on and on about something. But I don't know what it is, because all I'm thinking about is Buddy. At the end of the day, we have an assembly where the girls do flips and cheers, and then we all stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And finally, the day's over. I'm throwing my book bag over my shoulder in the hallway, and there's J-Boy watching one of those flip girls walking out the door carrying a gym bag and a sweater. I pull up beside him, and out the door we go. I got the dog, I say. I named him Buddy. He don't answer. I'm going to paint his name on his bowls. I'm going to use that model paint from those airplanes I made at Christmas. I'm going to... J-Boy is still looking at that girl. If you keep staring at her, you're going to burn a hole in her backside. J-Boy looks at me like he's about to say something, but he don't. The girl turns the corner, so I figure maybe now he can think. Are you learning those games, I say? What games? Those Game Boy games. Some. We're standing in line to get on the bus. All the kids are pushing and shoving, and can't nobody get on. You'd think they don't even want to get home from school. Finally, the driver straightens him out, and we start moving. J-Boy's looking the other way again. J-Boy, I say, and he turns around. Why you ain't been by the house in so long? He shrugs. We're finally climbing up the bus steps. Come by and see my dog, I say, and I take a front seat as usual. Maybe, J-Boy says, and passes on down the aisle. He high-fives two brothers from the high school and sits down behind them. I turn around and look out the window. The stores and churches and the houses roll on by. The oak trees are spreading out their shady arms. In the corner, a little kid is sucking a snowball and holding his mama's hand. But I ain't thinking about them. I've decided I ain't waiting any more for Jamila to write to me. I've decided I'm going to write to her first. In my mind, I'm already writing that letter. Dear Jamila, my letter will say, guess what? I have a dog. That very afternoon, I write that letter, and Mama sticks it in the mail. Then I fix up 2 bowls with Buddy's name on them. Buddy lays there the whole time watching me paint. Every once in a while his tail flicks and he grunts and moves around like he wants to get up. When the bowls are done, I try to help him. I get my hands up under him. I lift and he flops right back down. I say, it's okay, Buddy. You just ain't strong enough yet. Then I lay down beside him and he puts his head on my stomach. And I tell him stories. He listens to every word. Mama goes hollering for me, and I tell Buddy, where does she think I'm at? She knows I'm right here with you. Next day I feel like I can't hardly sit there in school all day long. After about 1,000 years I get home. Mama says I have to bag 3 dozen pralines, and I might as well get it done before I start messing with the dog. When I get out to the shed, Buddy's laying there, waiting for me, just like I knew he would be. We talk until dark. Then Mama makes me come inside to eat. But that's okay because Buddy's sound asleep. The next day I try to listen to the teacher, but it's hard. I'm about to fall asleep. Eventually the teacher says tomorrow we're going to start studying New Orleans. He says we're lucky to live here, and it's the best city in the world. I'm thinking that's all just fine, but when is this day ever going to end? Then all of a sudden the bell rings, and I want to jump out of my seat singing hallelujah. But I don't do that. I just hop on the bus and head on home. Daddy gives me a piece of wood from behind the shed, and Mama says I can use the leftover paint from when we did the kitchen last summer. It's yellow and white, and I think that's just about right. I saw that board off straight wait a second. I saw that board off straight on both ends, and I paint the whole thing white. Then I paint Buddy's house with the yellow, real careful, in big square letters. It don't show up as good as I want. So I take the blue from the model paints and I outline the letters. It looks perfect. Grandpa T helps me nail it up over the door to the shed, and we stand back and take a look. It all worked out, I say. What worked out? My plan. I got a dog. Yep. Grandpa T nods his head. Then he slaps me on the back and starts tee-heeing. So I guess you must be about the happiest boy in the world, he says, because there's one thing I can tell for sure. A dog is way better than a chicken. And that's the end of chapter 4. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you shalom.